Welcome back for part 3. Our current era is going to be broken up into 2 parts. Today we'll be discussing some stuff that happened in between 2015 and now, a little bit of Stellar Blade and the GamerGate 2 articles. There is more to it, but we'll have to wait for the next episode. Hope you enjoy the video. So coming off the back of 2015, a lot of time passed, a lot has happened between then and now, but some things don't change. One universal truth is that we humans are social creatures. We thrive and fail based on how we connect. But as with any system, any structure, any social construct, there has always and will always be those of us that realize that in the short term at least, it's fairly easy to exploit our desire to lift one another up. The idea of cuckoos, wasps, slaver ants, and zombie fungus comes to mind. As it is in natural biology, a grifter faces similar time constraints. Sooner or later, their motives are almost always revealed. But as long as they manage to assimilate their hosts before this happens, the truth proves to be inconsequential in the end. Anita Sarkeesian ran a second season of Choice vs. Women in Video Games, this time garnering only 256,000 views with an estimated dislike ratio of 73%. Feminist Frequency started to release its financial breakdowns where it was learned that 44% of the $158,922 was rationed as salaries. $69,925, that's almost 12 times the original Kickstarter goal that went into the pockets of Anita Sarkeesian and I don't know who else. The timing of this is very important, by the way. Remember that Anita and her team would have had to have been prepared to produce at least half of what they produced with $2,640. This necessitates that Anita and whatever team she was planning on paying would have to have almost zero interest in the project, and if not, then, well, one of two things is likely true. Either Anita Sarkeesian had a plan to increase the funding far beyond the asked goal, or the plan was always a grift and the intention was always to extract funds. Remember that this includes nothing of the YouTube monetization. Now, as time went on, this got worse. Feminist Frequency didn't produce 40% of the content that they said that they were going to produce, most notably the Men's vs. Trope series. This all happened while Anita flew from talk to talk, studio to studio, and sending some suspicious tweets in an attempt to land consultancy work within the industry. The 2018 report doesn't paint a better picture. As the popularity of Feminist Frequency plummeted, the operational costs just seemed to go up and up. Except in 2019, it comes to light that the managing editor, Carolyn Petit, is working on a volunteer basis. Also nice to note that Feminist Frequency is partnered with Crash Override, Zoe Quinn's online harassment help center. See the previous video on Wizard Chance harassment. And of course, Lego Butts is secretary of the board. Ultimately, the evidence of the Feminist Frequency grift became more and more apparent as time passed, leading to disenfranchisement. The other side of the coin is that Anita Sarkeesian's flavor of feminism lost out to choice feminism with the advent of OnlyFans. As it turns out, women like getting money and men like getting nudes, among other things. To be clear here, I'm not endorsing OnlyFans, I'm merely pointing out that people tend to place their own interests and status before their politics. And this is simply a case where Feminist Frequency's hard line on sexualization simply cannot stand up to a socially endorsed supply and demand. August 1st, 2023, Anita closes the door to Feminist Frequency. And if I may speak out of turn here, good riddance. In my opinion, they did insurmountable damage to the more rational aspects of feminism. Kyle Orland was likely not sorry for games genre pros and uses every opportunity he has to try to link Gamergate to the alt-right. In 2022, Ben Kuchera had a meltdown via Twitter where he said many pointed things about Polygon, notably that Polygon was corrupt and altered scores. He would later delete all these tweets blaming his 4-hour-long outburst on PTSD and a sustained panic attack. Oh, by the way, Ben Kuchera had been financially supporting Zoe Quinn on Patreon as far back as 2012. There's just too much, we're trying to move on. Jason Schrier wrote this article about Dragon's Crown titled "Game Developers Really Need to Stop Letting Teenage Boys Design Their Characters." Subsequently, Dragon's Crown sold out in Japan day one and became Vanillaware's most popular game. It would appear that maybe game developers really do need to start hiring more teenage boys to design their characters. I jest, the artist was also the president of Vanillaware, so Jason Schrier was forced to apologize, which just leads us to the circular nature of these sexualization oppression grifts. And yes, it is a grift because grifts always lead with a false equivalence and end in bad faith. Let me show you the sleight of hand in Jason's quote-unquote apology. To quote, Look, the gaming industry has a sexism problem. This is not very difficult to prove. Head to E3 and watch hordes of sweaty male attendees trample one another in order to get the best photos of booth babes. Read about one reason why. It's tough to find a woman who doesn't have a story about that one time someone said something way over the line, or the industry event that made her feel like she didn't belong. End quote. Notice how the argument is not about how the game reflects on the customer, but rather Jason is attempting to shift the goalposts. We saw this in the Games Journal Pro's emails with Ryan Smith as well. This is a shift to talk about the industry itself, and the reason why Jason does this is because he knows that he cannot produce a link between the designs in Dragon's Crown with sexism using a scientific study. At the very best, he could maybe cherry pick a survey with bad data. It's very clever. First thing he does is points out hordes of sweaty male attendees trampling one another to get photos of booth babes. Okay, but the article linked is actually a lighthearted parody of a bunch of photos of the guys that take photos of booth babes. There's no trampling. But let's address the sexism of booth babe culture. In 2009, Games Radar released an article named Interview with a Booth Babe. The interview includes male booth babes, which are booth dudes, by the way. Shockingly, it would appear that the booth babes interviewed actually like their jobs. To quote, "What do you think of the men that go around the show taking pictures of/with all the booth babes/models? C+2 Stephanie. I think it's a blast. I take pictures with all the cute guys and girls that work the booths because it's fun. I enjoy getting to meet them, even if it's just for a second. Sometimes we get to talk if it's not crazy busy, so of course I love it when someone wants to take a picture with me. It's flattering." End quote. You can read this entire article, you're not going to find anything disparaging towards gamers. That said, you could say that this article is a promo piece, so I will include this. In 2019, a Twitch partner named Zombie Unicorn made a video calling for the cancellation of booth babes, claiming that the companies they worked for were objectifying them. A booth babe on Twitter replied to Zombie Unicorn on the matter, pointing out that she didn't appreciate the slander against her profession, the assumption that booth babes don't have a voice, and that the company she works for is exploiting her. I mean, you can just Google booth babe interview and you can find more. Now, if it seems like I'm out on a tangent here, then bingo. None of this has anything to do with Dragon's Crown, except that the sorceress and booth babes share the same sex. The One Reason Why article is all about women in the games industry, as in not the majority of the player base or any one game, so get that out of here. Finally, there's a link to an article about topless women at a game developers party. Cool, except most gamers aren't party organizers or devs at Gameloft. Gameloft actually kicked the dancers out, by the way. They had to amend the article. Later, towards the conclusion of the article, Jason conflates the Dragon's Crown character design with sexual harassment at PAX East. In this link is a blog titled, "What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?" The blog is about a cosplay event organizer being harassed by games journalists and attendees at GDC. In particular, a CEO of a game company at the Games Developers Conference. Ironically, not only is the blog a complete Uno reverse card on Jason Schrier, but the writer literally makes this point. To quote, "To all you awesome men in the industry, please don't feel the need to apologize for the actions of others in your gender. Part of this blog was to bring to light that I want to be treated like a unique individual, not just have it assumed that all women are comfortable with the same set of behaviors. You've got nothing to apologize for if you've done nothing wrong." End quote. Overall, it's not difficult to see what Jason has done here. It's very clear that there is a problem in the games industry that is very easy to concede. He tries to share the blame of the games industry with gamers by linking customers to the bad actors in games development and journalism through booth babes, which doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and then says, "See, this is all happening because of sexy characters like this one in this particular Japanese fantasy side-scrolling RPG." This kind of assumption requires a leap of faith that is unfathomable to a rational human being. The incidents being cited aren't even in Japan. How is this an apology? How can you say that this is anything other than bad faith? Jason had no intention of admitting fault. He was merely trying to defend his narrative under the guise of something else. Now, I realize I'm devoting a lot of time to this particular incident, and it was a long time ago, but there is a method to the madness. Fast forward to present day, where a humble little demo of a game was released called Stellar Blade. Now, full disclosure, I've been a fan of of Shift Up for a long time. Some of you might not know, but Nikke Goddess of Victory is a gacha game made by Shift Up. I've been playing that for a long time now, and I've known about Stellar Blade from way back when it was called Project Eve. In fact, if you wanted to dumpster dive in my channel, you can find a VOD of me pointing out that the two main artists of Nikke are a husband and wife couple 4 months ago. What I love about Nikke so much, and I'll never be able to get this across, it's something you either get or you don't. All the sexual suggestion is front-loaded, but the story and what happens is incredibly engaging, and I think pulling off the feat of juggling what is essentially a harem game with something akin to the manga of Claymore takes an incredible amount of skill. And I need to point this out, Nikke is not a blip on the radar. Nikke is the 5th largest gacha game in existence, which, yeah, it's no Genshin, but you get the point. It also has a PC client. So you tell me if Nikke has sexualized characters. I'm gonna show you a few. I think it's fair to say that these characters are sexualized, right? Anyways, here's the IGN article on its release in 2022. Oh, seems like no one cares about the sexualization in Nikke. Now the Stellar Blade demo releases and we get games media, certain developers, and a certain Twitter demographic losing their minds. This is our first red flag. But why? Well, March was a very busy month indeed, but we need to go back to January 29th, 2024, when a gamer from Brazil named Cabrutus on Steam decided to make a curator page. The name of the curator page was Sweet Baby Inc. Detected. Sweet Baby Inc. was certainly a known entity before this. It was more of a case of who you follow on YouTube that would determine whether you were in the know or not. But what would move Sweet Baby Inc. front and center of the gaming stage was the decision by Sweet Baby Inc. employee Chris Kindred to not only incite the mass reporting of the curator page, but also Cabrutus's Steam account. Allow me to read you the mission statement of Sweet Baby Inc. to quote, "Founded in 2018, Sweet Baby Inc. is a narrative development and consultation studio based in Montreal and working around the globe. Our mission is to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry. We aim to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, more inclusive for everyone." End quote. Of course, the irony being that Chris Kindred cannot seem to achieve the inclusion part without trying to literally exclude someone from the gaming space that would be considered a vulnerable minority in both Canada, where Sweet Baby is based, and in the US where they operate. Chris was banned from Twitter X for a week as a result of his brigading. Lego Butts, surprise, who now works at Sweet Baby Inc. in 2024, chimes in with this. To quote, "Sorry, no one thing has changed. The number of people who understand that spreading misinformation just lets them be racist in public with no consequences has increased dramatically. That has changed. Probably requires some fighting from those with authority, probably. For example, Steam doesn't have guidelines for curators, as far as I can tell. That would prevent someone from starting a curation group that focuses on, say, Sweet Baby Inc. and warns people not to buy games they're associated with, which could just list any game at all." End quote. A grift always begins with a false equivalence. It's not racist to make a list of games you don't want to play. And if, say, 9,263 people agree that they also don't want to play those games, that's their right as the customer. As the curator page is still up now with 369,412 followers, I would say that Valve agrees with my view on the customer's rights. Twitter community notes explain that LegoButs works for Sweet Baby and that the curator pages uses Sweet Baby Inc.'s main page as their source. On the topic of being racist in public beyond reproach though, here are some tweets by LegoButs between 2012 and 2015, proving that maybe they were onto something with the racist in public thing, as it seems they thoroughly tested it in practice. Now, out of all the lessons of GamerGate in 2014, let's hypothetically imagine that journalists believed they were in the right and that games journal prose was not a big deal. You would think that if you really cared about maintaining civility, then you would absolutely, under no circumstances, take an action that would subsequently cause the Streisand effect and blow an issue sky high, right? Wrong. If Lego Butts and Chris Kindred didn't do enough to skyrocket the popularity of Kabrutus and the Sweet Baby Inc. detected page, then games journalism was about to take it to the moon. All in all, 15 articles released in early March, so not quite as coordinated as in 2014, but the sentiment is the same. Let me read you some of the titles. The return of GamerGate is smaller and sadder. Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't do what some gamers think it does. Diversity is not your enemy in a live service world. It's over 10 years since GamerGate. The industry must now stand up to far-right trolls. Why are Valve and Discord permitting harassment against Sweet Baby Inc.? Sweet Baby Inc. is under attack due to conservative conspiracy theories. What's interesting to note here is that no one from the curator page labeled this incident as GamerGate 2. Even me making this video with such a title is playing into their hands a little, but like, I want people to watch the video, so I digress. I can think of two reasons why journalists want to do this. One is to drum up attention by being edgy, and the other is that it is an effective way to turn the narrative back onto gamers by placing them as a collective. GamerGate was 10 years ago. A lot of people don't know anything about it. So if you write an article about how gamers were misogynists 10 years ago, people will Google GamerGate, the Wikipedia page of GamerGate in brackets harassment campaign will appear, and boom. What is the extremist trap? Assign the actions of individuals to a collective, assign blame to said collective, draw a battle line, and call to action. It's actually pretty clever in the sense that these particular journalists have found a way to recycle old propaganda. Now, this is a grift, and you know it's a grift because all grifts begin with a false equivalence and end in bad faith. Let's start with a Kotaku article by Alyssa Mercante titled, "Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't do what gamers think it does." No, one company isn't forcing diversity into all of your favorite games. We haven't even gotten to the text and there's already a straw man. It's not that gamers think that Sweet Baby is the only company or that they're the entirety of the problem. They are simply the most visible marker of the problem in the wake of the failure of Suicide Squad, which credits Sweet Baby employees like Amy Shaw, Grant Roberts, and well, pretty much every employee at Sweet Baby Inc. as they have their own credits section. Now, in defense of Sweet Baby Inc. here, I think that the dumpster fire known as Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was a collective effort of astronomical proportions. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was like some sort of bizarro Olympics of who could do more damage to the franchise. However, let me read you a codex entry from the perspective of Lex Luthor, who is Superman's arch nemesis. This is his thoughts on Wonder Woman. To quote, "I am prone to wild imaginings. As a man of science, speculation is how my mind finds leisure and the closest thing it knows to play. But there is little amusement to be found in imagining how improved Earth would be if instead of forcing the Amazons into hiding with our cruelty and avarice, we had instead looked to them as a model, replicable, if only we could set aside our baser instincts. They've solved so many of our society's ills, broken democracy, lagging technology, toxic masculinity, and thus they flourish through higher learning, mutual aid, and governance without cruelty. They are a golden society who deserve to be as secret as they are." Enter Wonder Woman, so named, I assume, because one wonders why a woman of her caliber and ancestry would leave paradise to play in the mud with us. End quote. If you don't know much about Lex Luthor, then what you need to know is that his major reasoning behind attacking the likes of Superman is that he wants humanity to struggle and continue to evolve. He sees the reliance on aliens or higher powers to be the downfall of mankind. Why then would this heavily principled stance flip-flop into US liberal feminist ideologies? Would one want the bald evil white man to champion feminism? Or does one think that white heterosexual males are more likely to sympathize with a villain? I don't know. I can't think of a single angle that isn't one-dimensional and childish. So you decide, does this writing seem forced to you? Now, did Sweet Baby write this particular entry? No one knows, and I doubt anyone is going to step out and be transparent on this one. What it does tell you though is that the writing in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is awful and it doesn't respect the legacy of the characters they're depicting. So then what was the point of hiring a consultancy studio that aims to be inclusive for everyone as stated in the mission statement if the overall result ends in the exclusion of the people that brought into the legacy of the franchise? The argument of many gamers is not that Sweet Baby is the disease, but rather the symptom of the echo chamber that exists in the industry. Many of us are aware that Sweet Baby does not enter a contract with the studio without being invited, but being invited is a marker that a developer is likely focused their attention and resources on something akin to that Lex Luthor entry that we just read, rather than making a good game, as evidenced by the failure of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Anyways, back to the Kotaku article. To quote, Late last month, one of the company's consultants discovered a Steam group dedicated to detecting games that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on. The purpose? To encourage people to avoid those games because the group had deemed that SBI was pushing a woke agenda by working toward greater diversity, equity, and inclusion, end quote. Alyssa conveniently leaves out the part where Chris attempted to incite brigading on the curator page and the creator. It's not just this article, almost every single one of these articles does it as well. They all omit this fact, and if they don't, then they downplay the severity of the action and omit the part where he called for the personal attack on Kabrutus' Steam account. Sweet Baby Inc.'s Wikipedia page is a great example of this. To quote, "The curator group known as Sweet Baby Inc. Detected received increased attention in February when a Sweet Baby employee asked others to report it for violating Steam's code of conduct." End quote. Except the page and Kabrutus' personal account were not in breach of the code of conduct. If they were, then the mass reporting would have succeeded. Now, I'll grant that the discussion thread is locked and both the posts and the discords were purged to remove inflammatory content. And honestly, that's fine. Some might claim that this is an admission of guilt, but like, it's thousands of people. Some of those people are exactly the kind of bad actor that games media portrays, and some of them are exactly the kind of bad actor that would like to get the group banned. And literally hundreds of thousands of people can exist in between. Any sane moderation team would purge the posts of bad and good actors if they can maintain a service for the demographic in between. I mean, how many people using the tracker even post in the group? No one bothered to ask that question. So yes, they would be purging harmful content regardless of whether or not the group owner had intentions of fostering a benign community or a malicious one. So in the end, it's kind of a dumb point. That said, why not just read the pinned community message? To quote, "Guys, I appreciate all the messages and friend invites that I've been receiving. I'm going to accept you all in due time. It's just that right now there's so much stuff happening at the same time here and on X that I simply cannot answer you all. I'm sorry for that. Keep in mind that this group curator has the goal of letting people know about the games that SBI has worked on. We are not, in any means, a group that is trying to kill SBI or even convince people to not buy any game that they've worked on. Everyone is free to buy any game, even if it's a game that SBI worked on. It's your decision. Also, I want to emphasize that this is not a place for those who want to practice bigotry or racism towards a specific group of people, or praise any kind of authoritarianism, be it from the left or the right. I don't care about your skin color, nor sex, gender, and sexual orientation, not even your religion. You're welcome to join and stay as long as you respect our position and don't try to jeopardize this community. Let's keep it cool and be wise with our words for the sake of the group curator longevity. Thanks for all your support. You guys are awesome. I'm very proud of what we are achieving." End quote. The other problem, of course, is that Alyssa misrepresents the purpose of the curator page. She claims that the page is created to encourage people not to purchase games that involve Sweet Baby Inc. Here's the About section. To quote, "A tracker for games involved with Sweet Baby Inc." End quote. This is an opt-in tracker, as in customers choose whether or not they want to be informed of the information given. Curator pages do not reach out and advertise to gamers. That is Chris Kindred's job, apparently. Furthermore, nothing in the tracker goes past general consumer information that is already available on the Sweet Baby Inc. website. It is true that the page does not recommend the games, but that is the right of Kabrutus to not like these games. The article goes on to refute its own claim in the title by acknowledging that gamers are not targeting Sweet Baby but DEI initiatives in general, which I'd argue is still not quite right, but we'll get to that. I'm not going to talk too much about Alan Wake 2. Alyssa draws the comparison that Sweet Baby did work on that game, and they had a certain actress teased as a character, and then when the game came out, the character was race swapped. The game director came out on Twitter saying that it's not true that this was a result of Sweet Baby's involvement. I'm not a mind reader, I haven't finished the game, so I will concede that. I think the strongest point Alyssa makes is that Alan Wake 2 was successful and that it was involved with Sweet Baby Inc. It's also why Alan Wake 2 is brought up in a lot of the other articles, because while there is some evidence to imply a race swap, it's just not a good position. However, I'm going to quote an article. This is an interview with the developers on creating Saga Anderson, the character in question. To quote, "For creating Saga Anderson, the developers at Remedy took a different approach compared to the process behind other hero characters, resulting in a more organic creative collaboration across different disciplines at Remedy Entertainment and outside parties, along with work working with story and narrative consultant Kim Belair of Sweet Baby Inc. to refine the character voice and story arc. The key creatives of Alan Wake 2 also worked extensively with the actress playing Saga Anderson, Melanie LeBird, who offered suggestions and other insights that led to the Saga Anderson scene in the final game. I think it took us a long time to find Saga, said Rowley on the character. It was an interesting process. We had an idea in our head on what that character could be, but then as the character evolves over time, being open to changing her based on input from the actors and the external sources really opened things up for us. I think that's important for us as a studio to be okay with, because we don't do it very often for our characters, this idea of how to create a new hero character. So it's kind of a big moment for us, and it was definitely interesting for me going through the process. End quote. Kim Belair is the co-founder of Sweet Baby Inc. As you can see, she was fairly involved with the creation of Saga Anderson, so much so that Remedy claims it to be a collaborative effort with external sources and something that they wouldn't normally do, which runs contrary to the narrative that Sweet Baby does not heavily influence projects they're involved with. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, where sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but I doubt anyone is being honest. Most notably, I'd like to draw attention to the only racist comment made in Alan Wake 2. The first here is how racism is defined by old Merriam-Webster. To quote, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Also, behavior or attitudes that reflect and foster this belief, racial discrimination or prejudice. Okay, so here we go.
The story. My life, my family is just part of a book. Another white asshole deciding what I get to do, how I get to do it. He took my daughter from me. I'll never be free of this story from him. He used her.
If you're about to tell me that this is not racist, then simply imagine Saga as Caucasian and change white to black. This is primary school stuff. So anyways, here's a clip of Kim Belair giving a speech at GDC in 2019 where she talks about growing up and writing stories about her family, but was then discouraged by high school reading lists.
Should preach equality and build communities. And I think this was really, really wonderful. But then I got to high school. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I got told that the stories that I was writing and the things that I was creating for and about people who resembled me weren't not real stories and they were not right stories. And this was to the point that I received a list that I'm sure many of you have received that was, here's a list of authors and stories that are legitimate. Here's a list of people and stories that are important. And as you can imagine, they were, mostly men and almost exclusively white. And all I wanted out of this whole life was to be a writer. And I wanted that so bad that I kind of said, okay, well, what do I need to be legitimate? And I just internalized everything that I had learned. And I did that for years. And I spent like actual years just writing about white men.
So Kim completely missed the entire point of classic literature and instead took it to mean that only white people can create art, which is a bizarre fixation on race rather than the content. She also admits to seeing race as a dividing barrier. Isn't it interesting that Saga reflects racism when talking about a white person writing a story that dictates her future, and Kim Belair blames white men for writing classics that then dictated her future as a writer. Now, again, I want to emphasize that this is purely speculation on my part. There is no way to verify a self-insert, but there is also no evidence that Alan Wake 2 would not have been more successful had Sweet Baby Inc. not been included. I mean, considering that Alan Wake 2 is yet to break even in 2024, was the cost of hiring external consultants to create this particular character really that meaningful? I'll let you decide. Anyways, back to the article. To quote, the games industry has had its fair share of struggles lately, from massive layoffs to wildly expensive games like Suicide Squad falling short of expectations. According to the loudest members of the Sweet Baby Inc. Detected Discord, the company is directly responsible for those failures, not the studios that employed them in the first place. End quote. So the loudest members believe that Sweet Baby Inc. is responsible for everything. What does loudest mean? Did you count them? Just because you can find poor reasoning, it doesn't invalidate the conclusion being correct. A simple example, if you go to China and you ask for water in a restaurant, they will give you hot water. This stems from an ancient belief that they need to have a balance between hot and cold within the body, and generally cold water is not good for you. However, hot water is actually good for you because boiling water kills bacteria and makes it safe to drink, meaning you are less likely to get sick. Pointing out that the customer cannot accurately explain the causes behind why these games are so unattractive to them does not invalidate that these games are unattractive to them and that they don't want to buy them. But it gets worse because later in the article, Alyssa demonstrates an example of someone more articulate. To quote, "Two members that spoke with me via Discord DM shared similar sentiments about why they believe the Steam page and subsequent Discord are important, so they can identify games that were developed with support from Sweet Baby Inc. and make an informed decision when purchasing them. Sweet Baby Inc. is a symptom of other ideological worldviews that I believe have taken hold of the Western world media and gaming as a whole," a 31-year-old member of the Discord told me. He also insisted, without proving evidence, that Sweet Baby Inc. adds race and identity group quotas to everything they are involved with. End quote. Note that most of the quotation marks are not the quotes of the interviewee, but rather Alyssa is asserting a bit of sass towards their claims. Why wouldn't you just quote them? She does this for Kim Belair further down the page. In any case, Alyssa is first trying to paint the majority of the members as idiots for not understanding game development, which isn't a necessary condition, and then proves that she actually does know the good faith point of view further down the page, but simply chooses to mock it. Let's read on. To quote, "Sweet Baby Inc. isn't forcing diversity, it's happening naturally. Though these kinds of social media posts argue that companies like Sweet Baby Inc. somehow force game studios to include diverse characters and storylines, the reality is vastly different. Sweet Baby Inc. is a narrative design company, meaning most of its work is focused on writing stories and dialogue. They are not a DEI consultancy firm. That means that they ensure that the game's plot points make logical sense and are satisfying to players, and that characters speak and behave in consistent ways. Narrative designers may also provide a final round of polish, like a Hollywood script doctor." End quote. Where to start? Sweet Baby Inc. is not a consultancy firm. Again, the mission statement, to quote, "Founded in 2018, Sweet Baby Inc. is a narrative development and consultation studio based in Montreal and working around the globe. Our mission is to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry. We aim to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone." End quote. I would like to underline the following words: diversifying, inclusive, and consultation. Under services, to quote, "We believe you need diverse voices to solve diverse problems. Sweet Baby Inc. provides narrative consultation at any stage of development, boasting a talented team with vetted industry experience to best bring your story to life." End quote. Diverse consultation. And then finally in the outreach section, to quote, "New and marginalized talent can change this industry if given the proper support. We want to provide this through our outreach programs. Industry reform. From opaque industry practices to a lack of entry-level roles, we understand the overwhelming challenge that comes with finding a space in games. We firmly believe that open communication, compassion, and the fostering of new talent are vital to transforming the game space into a kinder, more collaborative industry. The industry is far from where it needs to be, but we believe it can get there with shared resources, diverse talent, and transparent industry dialogue." End quote.
Hi, I'm Kim Belair, and I'm CEO of Sweet Baby Inc. A secondary level, we work very hard to get marginalized talent into the industry, to protect them the way that we would want to have been protected, to lift them up, and to get them into an industry where they're too often shut out. And basically, I think, to take over.
Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. Can you blame anyone for seeing a duck? Now, Alyssa is technically correct. They are not a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually law in the US, as in if your business has a practice or rule, and that practice or rule turns out to be of a benefit to a specific race at the exclusion of others, even if the intent was completely benign, then you could find yourself in court. DEI firms, initiatives, or practices are focused more on hiring, operations, and business culture. Sweet Baby Inc. is actually worse. Gamers don't realistically care about a studio's day-to-day operations as long as the people are being treated fairly. Sweet Baby's diversity, equity, and inclusion is directly aimed at the actual product that the customer is looking forward to. But while we're here, let's talk about the idea that this is being forced or coerced. And who better to say it than Kim Belair herself?
Put this stuff up to your higher-ups And if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want. Because they have to consider, like, I say that out loud as a joke, but it's actually very, very true, because if you start to consider the people who are player and audience facing and who have to deal with mitigating harm and with keeping the sentiment around their game and their project positive, there's like a genuine value that you can impress upon them with both ethically and financially. You can say this is important.
So yes, it's quite plausible that Sweet Baby Inc. has and intends to continue to buddy up to developers to coerce their higher-ups into hiring DEI consultants like Sweet Baby Inc. under the threat of causing outrage among minorities. Okay, well, so a few people get upset. Well, it's not quite the same. You see, you and I can boycott a game, and it either affects the sales or it doesn't. However, DEI is law in the US, which means that the threat of racial discrimination claims that come from within the company are far more serious. Just to be clear here, I'm not criticizing the law, I don't live in the US, I'm just pointing out that the threat Kim is implying is credible, and of course, simply look at the actions of the people that work there. Sweet Baby Inc. Detected is created, Chris Kindred attacks the page and the creator, Lego Butts attempts to spin a story about racism, not to mention their alleged expertise in DDoSing things they don't like. Ex-employee Danny Lalonde admits to purposely excluding white people from her team because white people are the sole source of microaggressions.
Mostly all people of color. We have no white people on our team. I did that because I wanted to create a safe environment. And I know the best way for an environment to be safe is to be around people who are just like me. I am saying that sometimes it is hard to work with white people because they think that something made okay, but it was really a microaggression.
Kim Belair says in this very article, to quote, "But the perspective is never that we're coming in and injecting diversity," end quote. But while she's with developers at GDC, she's saying this: ignore the desires of your core demographics, they are spoiled and entitled. Include us from the start of your game. Lobby your boss to get consultants. Terrify your marketing team with ethical and financial consequences if your boss doesn't listen. Assume your players want new stories told from diverse perspectives. There is always going to be a positive impact in making this assumption. There's no study to say that, but that's what she says. Treat representation as the selling point of your game. Hire diverse creators and support their integration in every facet of your studio. Before we move on, I want to go over this picky baby analogy, so let's hear it.
Still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males, and we cater almost exclusively to them. And the problem is that we don't just cater to them like, you know, here's something that we think you'll enjoy. We cater to them the way that we cater to like a picky baby. We feed them the same thing that we know that they love, and we keep on feeding it. We're like, here you go, you love it, eat this, eat this, eat this, so that then when they get anything else, they react as a picky baby would, which is be like, oh no, thank you, I do not want this. And we've actually done this so long that what we're doing is creating an entire nation of picky babies, and they make us scared to deviate from what we actually want to do, just in case these picky babies don't want to play our games.
This is insanely one-dimensional. Look, gamers are not just gamers. Some of us are married, some of us have kids, most of us work a job, some of us go to church, some of us volunteer, some of us are really into fitness. There are a million other things in our lives. While we are passionate about gaming, our lives are full. Most of us don't have a ton of time to spend playing a game. So if we're investing a little time into a game, it's unlikely that we will invest it on something that isn't exactly what we're after. We decide that, not you. Sure, we're open to suggestions, but it's not the customer's obligation to validate time with your product, simply because it's meaningful to you as the artist. When those two things overlap, that's truly great, but it's not the primary function. Furthermore, the analogy of a picky baby doesn't work because it works under the assumption that we're getting something for free, and also that we haven't been eating vegetables all day long, so to speak. I mean, take my own life for a moment. Most days, I work in IT, I manage people, I manage inter-office relationships, hardware logistics, I solve other people's problems all day long. I come home, I spend time with my wife, and then maybe I play a game, which I pay paid for with the money that I earned from doing that work. I then usually have to go to bed and then it all starts over again. A more accurate analogy would be that gamers are the customers at a restaurant after a hard day's of work. They order a dessert and you want to give them something else, which hey, that's fine, but it's not fine to act indignant that you don't get paid for bringing out something that wasn't on the order. Who is really entitled here? You decide. I'm not going to continue with the Kotaku article, but I will link it in the description. It goes on in an attempt to soften the intentions behind Sweet Baby Inc. But I think you get the point. This article is not in good faith, and frankly, any article that does not start with the harassment of Brutus is essentially in the same boat. We will hop over to the Return of GamerGate is smaller and sadder article by Parrish. I'm confident that we've pretty much covered everything as it's similar to the Kotaku article, though it's a little more thorough than Alyssa's work since it came out a bit later. It goes in on trying to defend Kim Belair's GDC speech, to quote, but a look at the clip's full context tells a different story. It's clear that Belair didn't want developers to scare their superiors into inclusivity. Instead, she wanted them to enlist support from the employees, those on the marketing and community side, who stand to receive the most backlash from players if those concerns aren't taken seriously, end quote. So what's the difference between scaring your superiors into inclusivity and enlisting your marketing department to do it for you? Isn't that worse? You know what? It has a name. It's called fear-mongering. Also, it's a bit of a slip of the mask that Ash is admitting to the severity of the backlash if they don't hire DEI consultants. You're actually affirming that this is like mob protection. It's literally the opposite argument of what she thinks she's saying. I'll link this article too so you can read it in your own time. Anyways, here's Ash in a private message admitting to leaving out the harassment on Brutus on purpose, so let's read that instead. To quote, "Hi. Let's chat. We're not going to agree and that's fine. We don't have to. I don't agree that Kindred calling for the report of the Steam list Brutus constitutes harassment. Associated with that list was a discussion forum, 100 pages of threads filled with terrible shit, up to and including harassment. Getting rid of the list gets rid of the forum, and you'll see now Steam cut that shit out. Those forums are gone, or at least they were last time I checked. And the list is still there. I'm not gonna fault Kindred for trying and halfway succeeding at getting a vector for harassment shut down. So that's the first part. You see it your way, I see it mine. As far as the omission for this instigating incident from reporting, okay, let's look at the event holistically, taking everything into account," end quote. Okay, since Ash seems unfamiliar with mass reporting as harassment, here's the part of the abstract for a research article titled "The Weaponization of Platform Governance, Mass Reporting and Algorithmic Punishments in the Creator Economy." To quote, "Mass reporting is particularly challenging for social media creators because of its weaponization of platform infrastructures for community governance, leaving creators with few avenues of support after orchestrated attacks and restricting their access to platform support. Drawing on in-depth interviews with social media creators who have been subjected to mass reporting on their content, this study builds an understanding of the ways in which tools for platform governance, such as content reporting, can be weaponized to harass and introduce vulnerabilities for creators," end quote. So Ash can choose to disagree, but I have a feeling she's just intellectually dishonest. Furthermore, if what Chris Kindred's actions, which are well documented and largely agreed upon as harassment, are not harassment, then it begs the question as to why anyone should take Ash's reports on other cases of harassment seriously. Why doesn't she just define harassment? Well, I think the answer is that she can't, because it's very likely that she would have to define harassment in a way that invalidates her other claims of harassment that she's made over the years. Also, there's the fact that in the article and in these messages, she doesn't provide any evidence of this harassment. And I have a feeling that it's because if she did, she would then be obliged to address the hateful posts of the Sweet Baby Inc. defenders, claiming that everyone that uses the tracker is racist. Or this post by this Sweet Baby Inc. employee. To quote, "My opinion as a Sweet Baby employee. Good day, fellow humans. I am salary staff member employed by Sweet Baby in a low to moderately important role. No, I will not give you my name or my exact role as it's irrelevant to this discussion and I don't need the doxing death threats. Anyways, I came across this Steam group from internal discussions within the company and actually found a link to here from browsing news posts. Generally, I wouldn't have time, energy, or the gumption to openly engage like like this, but I feel this community has taken such a weirdly toxic and unhealthy approach that I gritted my teeth to sit down and write this, if only because I wanted to vent, and not just to myself in the car or to my colleagues. So here goes. First, Sweet Baby Incorporated is a privately funded organization in whole. We'll get to that. Second, we are solicited for services by companies who are requesting our services. We do not solicit or use tactics of any kind to increase clientele. Third, any advice, narrative writing, representation, development, etc. is provided exactly as or as close to exact as the company demands as per the contract. We do not go above and beyond to ruin your game. We perform a specific service and are rewarded monetarily. This is called a company. So those short spurts, I continue. We live in a capitalistic society and this company does what it does for profit and not for ideology. Even if we closed our doors today, another company would take our place and fulfill the same role. In fact, we are one of at least several dozen companies of this sort that exist in Eastern Canada. Now let me tell you this, every single AAA game that has come out in the past 10 years has used a service such as ours. Trigger warning, sensitive political topics. Now, with that last sentence in the above paragraph in mind, what are you going to do now that you know this information? Not buy any new games at all? Are you going to shrug your shoulders and buy new AAA games that are only kind of diverse or only have a few women in the main plot? Here's the thing, I'm taking a solid guess that the overwhelming majority of the humans here are white. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that in essence, but look at it this way. Here is this group, and people who support this group, whether they know it exists or not, are extremely overwhelmingly white males who have a patriarchal and racist view of the world, ideology. Some of you may not be Nazis. Some of you may hate Nazis, but nonetheless at least unconsciously follow an outdated patriarchal view of the world. Some of you may hate women. Some of you may respect women, respect in the narrow patriarchal sense, etc., etc. I can provide an infinite number of examples that will waste both of our times and not really get anywhere. Here's the main point I've been building up to. We live in 2024. The times have changed. This is no longer 1999, where gaming was full of overweight, smelly white nerds who couldn't get a girlfriend, who upon seeing the changing demographics in their countries lashed out consciously and unconsciously throughout their favorite medium of escapism from reality, video games. As said, it's 2024. Gaming and the internet in general is no longer niche. Developers no longer have to use outdated racist and sexist modems to appeal to a target demographic of the 1999 crowd. Let me say it again, in a different way. Gaming is no longer just for you. There are other people in this world that want to play video games and enjoy other such sources of entertainment. If you do not want to buy a game because it has a BIPOC or woman main character, that's okay. It's your money. Do what you want with it. This is a free country, but maybe use some empathy and think that you are now a minority in this sphere. There are millions upon millions of women and BIPOC people who want to buy video games and who want to be represented. They want different stories that they can relate to. The white men killing people and taking advantage of women games are a long dead trope that only developers on their last limbs do. As market research has shown, white males of a patriarchal nature are devoutly fanatical and will quickly shell out large amounts of money if a game appeals to their base desires. Anyways, I've said what I've wanted to say. I've let it all out. I might reply to comments that provide genuine points of interest that aren't angry white cavemen ego grunting. If you somehow manage to track my name or whatever down, I don't regret writing this. And even if this post is deleted, my views are the same. I hope in these writings some glimmer of hope can come upon you downtrodden, middle-aged white men. End quote. I mean, it's pretty difficult to wash the racism out of that one, isn't it? And I think that's Ash's dilemma here. Per capita, there's simply more visible evidence toward racist ideologies within Sweet Baby Inc. than the people that are using the tracker. Unless, of course, you're hiding behind the skirt of modern feminist definitions and demanding that you cannot be racist to white people, like Alyssa Mercante asserts, but we'll get to that. Anyways, let's continue. To quote, Chris Kindred finds this list, asks folks to report this list and its maker. Reports are filed and Steam acts only as far as to lock the forum. The list still exists. Cabrutus's account still exists. This is where this story should end, and all in all, that's not really report worthy because it's an interpersonal conflict that ends in a stalemate. Happens all the time. End quote. This is like saying that murder is a story, but attempted murder isn't. What? What do you mean it's not a story? Here, I'll write the headline for you. DEI consultant lashes out. Gamers say no. The story is how gamers actually stood up to bullying by rallying around the victim. You cannot deny that Chris's actions directly caused the popularity of the group. This is essential information to understanding why it happened. But anyways, let's continue. To quote, "But as we both know, the story doesn't end here. It continues, and what resulted of that interpersonal conflict was this outsized outpouring of the grossest kinds of bigotry that blew up so big. Well, you see, this is the story. I get that in respect of thoroughness and completeness, not sharing that Kindred started this is upsetting and feels like a lie of omission." It doesn't feel like it is. But what does including it do? How does including that detail materially change the circumstances of the story? Let's be honest and real here. Not much. Does what Kindred did with his tweet warrant the response he, his boss, his company, journalists, and sympathetic developers received? No, not even close. Kindred said, "Hey, this sucks, let's take this shitty thing down," and the guy who did it. And the response was death threats. And so you run into this thing where including this detail makes it seem like the inciting incident is on equal footing with what happened next, and it's so not. It is so not. Best analogy I can think of is like a woman is walking down the street minding her business. She sees a guy looking at her with a nasty expression. She tells the guy to fuck off, and the guy apes her. The guy was totally within his rights to look, and the girl was totally in her rights to tell him to fuck off. This is a really dumb analogy because we're not dealing with individuals, and it's a poor attempt to use something ugly to draw emotional appeal. Don't be fooled. If we were dealing in individuals, you would have to compare the actions of Chris versus Kabrutus. Making a list of games you don't want to play based on a developer is not synonymous with staring at a person. They are interacting with a product, not a person. Chris, on the other hand, was attacking a person. Multiple people, in fact. If you caused a riot, would you not expect to be beaten in the frenzy? Now, I do agree that death threats are not good, but come on. The level of entitlement is like sticking your head in a beehive and expecting not to get stung. But anyways, let's move on. To quote, "I'll share the conversation I had with my editors about this because in preparation for my piece, I struggled with this particular bit, and the conversation I had really helped me understand. Gabrutus and his ilk have a grievance against Sweet Baby Inc. that is rooted in racism and misogyny and has no basis in the reality of how video game development works. That's it. Period. And when you get into the nitty-gritty of who did what and when, not obviously the who's and the what's that are necessary to explaining the story, that central premise gets lost. And me personally, I have to remember what my piece is ultimately about. And it's not about providing a timeline of events, it's bigger than that. It's about explaining that the reason you're hearing about this company called Sweet Baby and GamerGate 2 getting thrown around is because there's a group of people who decided they hate woke video games and found a convenient scapegoat to target and a larger conspiracy to underpin it. With that big picture thesis, those smaller details, even the ones considered important to the players involved, become largely immaterial to the story. Kindred's tweets and his gloating, however bad or ill-advised they might be, is not the fulcrum on which the story is made or broken. And I understand why you don't see it that way, why others have the anger they do about it, and I'd urge you to think about it this way. This story, mine, Kotaku's, everybody else's, really honestly isn't even about Sweet Baby. It's not about defending them or protecting them specifically, it's bigger than that. It's about explaining to readers that there's a group of people trying to fight another cultural war within the video game space just like 10 years ago, and they're using the same language and playbook, targeting the same kinds of people, but fundamentally, this movement isn't going to have the same outcome it did last time. These cultural warriors are like Don Quixotes and have picked a fight they've already lost. Here's why. That's the story. That's really the only story here. I'll ask you this genuinely. Does not including the bit about Kindred's tweets make it seem like I'm being unfair to the Steam group? Does it cast any of their actions or words before the tweets or after in a different light?" End quote. Lovely speech. I'll point out something though. Not here or the article does Ash provide evidence for anything she is talking about. How is it that I can provide sources for both 2014 and now, but she, as someone that has been in the forums or on the Discord as a paid journalist, someone that is trying to link these events to GamerGate, seemingly cannot produce any original sources for GamerGate or the current incidents? Her company's code of ethics states that original sources should be used whenever possible. Where is the evidence that Kabrutus made the tracker for racist reasons? Can you even explain it? And what do you mean by his ilk? Are you really trying to use the those people card? Ash is making the mistake of confusing the role of a journalist with a propaganda announcer. Let's read the Verge's ethics statement under professional conduct. To quote, "In addition to standards that preserve our independence, the Verge's reporters are expected to abide by industry standard ethical guidelines for reporting. This means that our editorial team takes great care to learn the truth and report it, protect sources, minimize risk of harm, and strive for accuracy and honesty in everything we publish. We use the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics as a baseline for the professional conduct of our editorial staff." End quote. And if we go over to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, to quote, "Seek the truth and report it. Ethical journalism should be accurate and fair. Journalists should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information. Journalists should take responsibility for the accuracy of their work. Verify information before releasing it. Use original sources whenever possible. Remember that neither speed nor format excuses inaccuracy. Provide context. Take special care not to misrepresent or oversimplify in promoting, previewing, or summarizing a story." End quote. If excluding the harassment of Kabrutus gets in the way of the premise of your story, then you are admitting that the addition would alter the perception of your readers. You are admitting that the addition of truthful facts would lead to a more informed decision with the added context. This runs contrary to your code of ethics. This is simply rampant confirmation bias based on the very same articles and opinion pieces that are enshrined on the GamerGate Wikipedia page from all the way back in 2014, and I know this because Ash actually links one of the articles from the Wikipedia page's sources. We're pretty much done with Ash Parrish's article here, but we need to address one more thing. To quote, "Diversity in games isn't going anywhere, and the practice of hiring consultants to punch up narratives certainly isn't going to change. Improving diversity continues to be an animating force in the industry. Xbox, Nintendo, and Sony have made DEI a core part of their business, with commitments to diversify not only their workforces but their games as well. DEI is a moral necessity until the people making games are a decent approximation of the world they are making games for," wrote Sam Barlow, director of several award-winning games, including Immortality, Telling Lies, and Her Story. End quote. Well, let's talk DEI in the workplace first. I agree that DEI practices in the workplace are not going anywhere in the sense of the spirit of equality, but they are definitely going somewhere different from where they are now. For one, the US Supreme Court has denied affirmative action in college application selection, and there are currently a number of lawsuits that challenge the different diversity grants and policies for excluding particular races. As a result, many companies are actually downsizing DEI funding and efforts. Here's a quote from an article named "DEI Programs in the US Are Crumbling Under Legal Battles. Will the Trend Continue to Australia?" by Women's Agenda. To quote, "In recent months, the world's biggest companies have been modifying their DEI policies. Giants including JP Morgan, Chase, American Airlines, Lowe's, and Pizza Hut operator Yum brands have altered or in some cases even cut their DEI programs amid claims their programs constitute illegal discrimination and a breach of the director's duties to investors. Google, Nike, Amazon, and Meta have reduced their DEI departments. According to a source obtained in CNBC, Google and Meta also make cuts to staff members responsible for recruiting underrepresented people." End quote. So yeah, I imagine there will be a trickling effect that will hit the gaming industry at some point. One could argue that it is hitting it now. As for the lawsuits and the rulings, these could well lead to legal changes that will affect how many DEI studios hire their staff. Furthermore, let's not pretend that DEI has been this grand success. Change to DEI in the workplace is long overdue. From Harvard Business Review, the failure of the DEI industrial complex. To quote, "There's a big poorly kept secret in the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry. The actual efficacy of any uncomfortably large proportion of our flagship services, talking points, and interventions, unconscious bias training, racial sensitivity workshops, and the business case for diversity resume, anonymization, and the like is lower than any practitioners make it out to be. Unconscious bias training rarely changes actual behaviors and has little impact on explicit biases. A meta-analysis of hundreds of prejudice reduction interventions found few that unambiguously achieved their goals. Many popular interventions run the risk of backlash, strong adverse reactions that sustain or even worsen the inequity that practitioners attempt to eliminate. Even the business case for diversity, a decades-old rhetorical framing and justification for DEI work, has been found to backfire on marginalized groups, feelings of belonging, and weaken support for diversity programs when organizational performance drops. Much of the problem rests with the extreme lack of standards, consistency, and accountability among DEI practitioners. Few of us measure the effectiveness of our interventions, and while there are many players in the DEI certification space, there is little agreement on what actual skills and competencies are necessary to become a good practitioner." End quote. I think that pretending like there aren't problems in an industry, even if you like that industry, it shouldn't go unstated unless you're trying to go for the Roman Catholic approach. Now look, I don't care about how a studio operates. I don't care if they have diversity managers, voluntary training, college recruitment programs, mentoring. I don't care. I also don't care if Sweet Baby is hired as a consultant, but I'm going to take note, and it's the right of any customer to do so. Without reason, by the way, but I'll give you one regardless. Mandated DEI in the workplace has never worked, and it actually makes racism and sexism worse, dating back even before World War II. So, if I as a gamer observe instances in a game that feel out of place, like, I don't know, a lady randomly blurting out something racist out of nowhere, a xenophobic supervillain suddenly fawning over an all-woman society of foreigners, characters that were attractive in previous games becoming less attractive in spite of the models they're based on, the same Killmonger hairstyle at every opportunity, the main character on the box becoming the supporting actor in their own story. When I see these things in a game, it's plastic. It's so incredibly vapid. And yes, it feels mandated. At the end of the day, the intention of the author doesn't matter as much as the perception of the buyer. And I perceive something that isn't doing what it says it's doing. I don't think these games are fixing bigotry. I think they're actually fostering it. I don't care who is responsible, whether it's Sweet Baby, the developer, the publisher, the journalists, Biden, cosmic gamma rays. I don't care, but I do care that it continues, and many gamers quite visibly agree. And so they are communicating in the only language this industry speaks, and that is in dollars not spent in the West and dollars spent in the East, where this doesn't exist in the same magnitude. There's also a further problem in defining diversity here, and we'll get to this when we talk about Microsoft as well, but what does diversity in gaming actually mean? Because in the context being discussed, it's diversity in human race and gender, which is a gross simplification of the kind of diversity possible in the video game medium. Consider Shale from Dragon Age Origins. Shale is a sentient golem who was frozen in place while still conscious for decades. Or Justice, which is a spirit from the Fade that aspires to embody the virtue of justice in the physical realm. In these two simple examples, you explore real human emotions, and your perspectives are challenged not because they represent your race or your sex, but rather from what reflects back at you from their uniquely inhuman points of view. This is exactly why this grift is so exhausting to gamers. Everything is purely skin deep, or what is or isn't between your legs. It just comes across as incredibly shallow. How about this? Dark Souls is a diverse representation of narrative in games. Hidetaka Miyazaki grew up reading English books, but he couldn't understand all of it, so he had to piece the bits that he knew together and construct his own narrative. This was the basis for how we collect items, talk to NPCs, and observe our environment environment in Dark Souls to try and piece together the mystery of that cryptic world. This is a diverse interpretation of Western mythology from the perspective of a foreigner, and it is told in a way that more than likely only a foreigner was going to think of. And yet, many Westerners love this interpretation. We don't care that it's not Tolkien or someone of white heritage. Of course, we want developers to have access to consultants if it enriches their game. Final Fantasy XVI was written by Japanese writers and the English dialogue was recorded first. We know they had help, and whoever they worked with to capture the tone and feel of that middle-aged fantasy did an excellent job. And you know what? It was still unmistakably Japanese and Final Fantasy. We didn't care that it didn't perfectly represent our modern Western values. One of the most powerful characters is Dion, and he's clearly gay, and yet there was no backlash from this supposed homophobic gamer majority, this unicorn majority that cannot be quantified. Wukong Black Myth is a highly anticipated game. You know why? Because it looks really cool and it's a mythology that many gamers know little about. They are excited because of its cultural diversity. How about Untitled Goose, a game about harassing a neighborhood as a goose? You don't even need to be a human in a video game. And okay, let's hypothetically entertain the idea that we're looking at race and gender. Why are the ideas that are being explored so incredibly narrowed? I mean, I was born in South Africa, so I have a different background to some of you, but just off the top of my head, here's some ideas. You can make an action game in the same vein as God of War about King Shaka Zulu, but you don't. You could make a horror game about the Tukolosh, a mythical spirit that comes from Zulu culture that can be summoned to terrorize others, but you don't. How about a sim game where you can simulate an entirely politically left-leaning utopia? It's never been done. You could make a gacha game where literally 0 characters are straight and the objective is to romance the other characters. None of these things have been done to any real degree of quality to note. Most diversity efforts made within the gaming space are incredibly bland and half-hearted, coming across like someone trying to mix something in your drink and hoping that you don't notice the weird fizz. Let's be real, if you actually cared about DEI in the video game's player base, if you really cared, you would focus on proven DEI practices. Namely, the games industry would focus on consistent live events that bring people together for group play, couch co-op, split screen, literally anything that gets people playing together in person. Bringing people together in person with the inclusion of minorities is a proven DEI practice that produces results. Changing the skin color of a character and calling it progress is something only a racist would claim. Being unable to relate to a core human experience unless they share your skin color is the way only a racist could feel. Tearing down a strong character because you want their light is a malice that only a weak person could harbor. A spirit of equality lifts others up, but never at the expense of what is already good. And a genuine talent creates. So then why is it that diversity, equity, and inclusion in video games predominantly just disfigures beloved franchises? Can one measure the good that is being done, or can one only measure how much of it there is? Dear viewer, you decide.